Very good morning to you all. It is my greatest pleasure and honor to address the Board of Governors of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group as we gather virtually. These annual meetings are taking place during an unprecedented global pandemic. COVID-19 is first and foremost a human tragedy that is causing immense loss of lives and disruption across our membership. My deep condolences to those who have lost loved ones and best wishes to everyone affected by the virus. This is an economic shock like no other. Social distancing and lockdown of cities have come at an economic cost, an unavoidable trade-off. The impact on emerging markets and low-income countries have been particularly severe. Though the pandemic has evolved more slowly than in other parts of the world, many of these economies have been affected by spillovers from weaker global demand, lower commodity prices, and a drop in tourism, with disproportionate impact on low-skilled workers and those employed in the informal sector, potentially pushing families back into poverty. While lockdowns and containment measures can be effective in stopping the spread of the virus, due to the food insecurity in several developing countries, many households risk going hungry if a lockdown lasts more than 2 weeks. This can lead to malnutrition and worsen health outcomes. In addition, widespread school closures and lack of internet access for remote learning risk leading to a significant loss of learning and human capital and can reduce lifetime earnings for children in low-income countries. Many of these children, particularly girls, will not return to school after the pandemic. Policymakers have been quick to respond to the crisis. In Ghana, for example, we have implemented a range of public health and socio-economic measures, such as using drones to deliver samples for testing and delivery of essential services, supporting frontline health workers, covering the cost of testing and treatment, and providing economic relief to citizens and enterprises, including by offering food assistance and free utility services. Countries' additional COVID-related fiscal spending has led to higher financing requirements. For many emerging market and developing countries, the crisis has triggered urgent liquidity pressures. The fund and bank have responded swiftly and at scale, helping countries strengthen their pandemic response and healthcare systems. The fund doubled access to its emergency financing facilities and has provided financial assistance to over 80 countries. It has also provided grant-based debt service relief through the Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust. The bank is providing up to $160 billion in financing tailored to the health, economic, and social shocks countries are facing. Emergency operations to fight the pandemic have reached 100 developing countries. Fast-track facilities were rolled out to ensure swift and broad support to help countries deal with their immediate health emergency needs. The bank is also a strong advocate for equitable access to any COVID-19 vaccine, which will be especially critical for the poorest countries. As an important complement to the emergency financing provided by the fund and the bank, the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative has provided temporary suspension of bilateral debt service payments to 43 countries. I am proud to see that the international community has risen to meet this daunting global challenge with global solutions. But this is not yet the moment to look back. The crisis is not over, and the pandemic continues to take a significant toll as more people have slipped into poverty and inequality has worsened, particularly among women and children who have been the hardest hit. The role of the Bretton Woods institutions in galvanizing global attention and support, particularly for the most vulnerable, is commendable, but there is still room to better address the needs of all members. We are facing the prospect of years of poverty reduction and economic progress being reversed by the pandemic. The shock waves from the COVID-19 crisis could lead to a lost decade for the world's poorest countries unless they receive urgent help and financial assistance. Fellow governors, the time to act is now. We need to enact policies that protect recent hard-won capital gains and prevent long-term damage to the poorer and vulnerable segments of our societies. We also need to continue support from the international community to avoid this health crisis becoming a humanitarian crisis. As we move out of the firefighting mode, we should think about the type of post-COVID world we want to shape. We need a recovery that is people-centered, sustainable, and fair. The COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that a virus knows no borders. We are all in this together, and the global financial safety net is only as strong as its weakest link. But we also know that multilateral cooperation can provide a response of unparalleled reach. The fund and the bank membership has shown that we can come together and act when needed. It is important that we keep this momentum as we discuss our shared challenges and joint solutions for global health, economic prosperity, and equality over the coming days. I commend the IMF and the World Bank Group for once again showing their strong commitment to global economic cooperation and bringing us together by arranging the virtual 2020 annual meetings. I look forward to productive days ahead. Thank you. At this time, I would like to call on the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund and the President of the World Bank Group to address the governors.
I first want to thank Dr. Ernest Kwamina Addison for his excellent remarks and for his contributions as Chairman of the IMF's Board of Governors. Reflecting on the dramatic change in the world over the last year, I paid a visit to Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, where 44 men signed our Articles of Agreement in 1944. Our founders faced two massive tasks: to deal with the immediate devastation caused by the war and to lay the foundation for a more peaceful, more prosperous post-war world. At the conclusion of the conference, John Maynard Keynes captured the significance of international cooperation as hope for the world. If we can continue, the brotherhood of men will have become more than a phrase, he said. As we look forward to welcoming Andorra as our 190th member, the work of the IMF is testament to the values of cooperation and solidarity on which a sisterhood and brotherhood of humanity is built. Today, we face a new Bretton Woods moment, a pandemic that has already cost more than 1 million lives, an economic calamity that will make the world economy 4.4% smaller this year and strip an estimated 11 trillion of output by next year. An untold human desperation in the face of huge disruption, rising poverty for the first time in decades. Once again, we face two massive tasks: to fight the crisis today and build a better tomorrow. We know what action must be taken right now. A durable economic recovery is only possible if we beat the pandemic. Health measures must remain a priority. I urge you to support production and distribution of effective therapies and vaccines to ensure that all countries have access. I also urge you to continue support for workers and businesses until a durable exit from the health crisis. We have seen global fiscal actions of 12 trillion. Major central banks have expanded balance sheets by 7.5 trillion. These synchronized measures have prevented the destructive macro-financial feedback we saw in previous crises. but almost all countries are still hurting, especially emerging market and developing economies. And while the global banking system entered the crisis with high capital and liquidity buffers, there is a weak tail of banks in many emerging markets. We must take measures to prevent the buildup of financial risks over the medium term. We face what I have called a long ascent for the global economy, a climb that will be difficult, uneven, uncertain, and prone to setbacks. But it is a climb up, and we will have a chance to address some persistent problems: low productivity, slow growth, high inequalities, a looming climate crisis. We can do better than build back the pre-pandemic world. We can build forward to a world that is more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive. We must seize this new Bretton Woods moment. How? I see three imperatives. First, the right economic policies. What was true at Bretton Woods remains true today. Prudent macroeconomic policies and strong institutions are critical for growth, for jobs, for improved living standards. One size does not fit all. Policies must be tailored to individual country needs. Support remains essential for some time. Withdrawing it too early risks grave and unwarranted economic harm. The stage of the crisis will determine the appropriate shape of this support, generally broader early on and more targeted as countries begin to recover. Strong medium-term frameworks for monetary, fiscal, and financial policies, as well as reforms to boost trade, competitiveness, and productivity, can help create confidence for policy action now, while building much-needed resilience for the future. That includes keeping a careful watch on risks presented by elevated debt. We expect 2021 debt levels to go up significantly to around 125% of GDP in advanced economies, 65% of GDP in emerging markets, and 50% of GDP in low-income countries. The fund is providing debt relief to its poorest members, and with the World Bank, we support extension by the G20 of the debt service suspension initiative. Beyond this, where debt is unsustainable, it should be restructured without delay. We should move towards greater debt transparency and enhanced creditor coordination. I am encouraged by the G20 discussions on a common framework for sovereign debt resolution, as well as on our call for improving the architecture for sovereign debt resolution, including private sector participation. We are there for our member countries, supporting their policies. And policies must be for people. My second imperative. To reap the full benefits of sound economic policy, we must invest more in people. That means protecting the vulnerable. It also means boosting human and physical capital to underpin growth and resilience. COVID-19 has underscored the importance of strong health systems. Rising inequality and rapid technological change demands strong education and training systems to increase opportunity and reduce disparities. Accelerating gender equality can be a global game changer. For the most unequal countries, closing the gender gap could increase GDP by an average of 35%. And investing in our young people is investing in our future. They need access to health and education, and also access to the internet, because that gives them access to the digital economy, so critical for growth and development in the future. Expanding internet access in sub-Saharan Africa just by 10% of the population could increase real per capita GDP growth by as much as 4 percentage points. Digitalization also helps with financial inclusion as a powerful tool to help overcome poverty. Just as the pandemic has shown that we can no longer ignore health precautions, we can no longer afford to ignore climate change, my third imperative. We focus on climate change because it is macrocritical, posing profound threats to growth and prosperity. It is also people critical and planet critical. In the last decade, direct damage from climate-related disasters adds up to around $1.3 trillion. If we don't like this health crisis, we will not like the climate crisis one iota. Our research shows that with the right mix of green investment and higher carbon prices, we can steer toward zero emissions by 2050, and we can help create millions of new jobs. We have a historic opportunity to build a greener world, also a more prosperous and job-rich one. With low interest rates, the right investments today can yield a triple dividend tomorrow, avert future losses, spur economic gains, save lives, and deliver social and environmental benefits for everyone. At the Fund, we are working tirelessly to support a durable recovery and a resilient future as countries adapt to structural transformations brought on by climate change, by digital acceleration, and the rise of the knowledge economy. Since the pandemic began, we have committed over $100 billion, and we still have substantial resources from our $1 trillion in lending capacity. We will continue to pay special attention to the urgent needs of emerging market and low-income countries, especially small and fragile states, helping them to pay doctors and nurses and protect the most vulnerable people and parts of their economy. Our unprecedented action was only possible thanks to our members' generous support. The doubling of the new arrangements to borrow and a new round of bilateral borrowing arrangements preserves our much-needed financial firepower. Members also have stepped up with essential contributions to our catastrophe containment and relief and poverty reduction and growth trusts. This has allowed us to support our low-income members with debt relief and to triple our concessional lending. We are engaging with members to further boost our concessional lending capacity, to adapt our lending toolkit, and to increase support for capacity development. IMF staff, working day and night, have been magnificent in this crisis. My sincere thanks to them and to my management team. And my deep appreciation to our executive directors. They have been there every step of the way over the past 6 months. The best memorial we can build to those who have lost their lives in this crisis is, in the words of Keynes, that bigger thing: building a more sustainable and equitable world. Our founders did it. It is now our turn. This is our moment. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my friend and great partner to the IMF, President David Malpass of the World Bank Group.
Chairman Addison, thank you for your remarks. And thank you, governors, Kristalina, and distinguished guests for joining us today. I wanted to provide an update on what the World Bank Group has accomplished since last year's annual meetings, particularly our response to COVID-19 and progress made on debt transparency. The COVID-19 pandemic's toll has been enormous, and people in the poorest countries are likely to suffer the longest and hardest. The crisis has knocked more economies into simultaneous recession than at any time since 1870, and it could lead to a lost decade characterized by weak growth, a collapse in many health and education systems, and a new round of sovereign debt crisis. In response, our approach at the World Bank Group has been comprehensive. We are focused on saving lives, protecting the poor and vulnerable, working towards sustainable business growth, and rebuilding in better ways. Today, I'm going to focus on 4 of the most urgent aspects of this work. First, we need to redouble our efforts to alleviate poverty and inequality. COVID-19 has dealt an unprecedented setback to the global effort to end extreme poverty, raise median incomes, and create shared prosperity. The global economy is expected to partly recover in 2021 from its worst recession since World War II. Although it is growing again, global activity is expected to remain well below its pre-pandemic trend for a prolonged period. Developments thus far point to shallower recessions in advanced economies and a more robust rebound in China than previous estimates. However, in the majority of other emerging and developing economies, the recessions in 2020 have turned out to be much deeper, and recoveries have been more delayed than June estimates, largely reflecting more damaging economic disruptions from the pandemic. The World Bank's new poverty projections suggest that by 2021, an additional 110 to 150 million people will have fallen into extreme poverty, living on less than $1.90 a day. COVID-19 and its associated economic crisis, compounded by the effects of armed conflict and climate changes, are reversing hard-won gains in poverty reduction, ending more than 2 decades of continuous progress. Poverty is expected to rise in 2020 for the first time since 1998. It's clear that we face a unique pandemic of inequality. The downturn is broader and deeper, and it has hit informal sector workers and the poor, especially women and children, the hardest. The World Bank Group took broad, fast action early, and we provided a large net positive flow to the world's poorest countries. We are making good progress toward our announced 15-month target of $160 billion in surge financing, much of it to the poorest countries. Over $50 billion of that is in the form of grants or low-rate, long-maturity loans, providing key resources to maintain or expand healthcare systems and social safety nets. Thanks to the generous support of IDA donors to IDA 19 in December, and to the completion of the IBRD and IFC capital increase packages in March, this size of response is consistent with the financial sustainability frameworks agreed for our institutions. Second, we need to take note of the loss of human capital underway and what can be done to restore it. Before the pandemic, developing countries were making significant progress and, notably, starting to close gender gaps. Due to the outbreak, more than 1.6 billion children in developing countries have been out of school, implying a potential loss of as much as $10 trillion in lifetime earnings for these students. Gender-based violence is on the rise. Child mortality rates are also likely to rise significantly. These setbacks imply a long-term hit to productivity, income growth, and social cohesion, which is why we're doing everything we can to bolster health and education in developing countries. In the area of health, we established a fast-track COVID response that has delivered emergency support to 111 countries so far. Most projects are now in advanced stages of disbursement for the purchase of masks, emergency room equipment, and other COVID-related supplies. We are also helping developing countries with COVID vaccines and therapeutics. We plan to make available up to $12 billion to countries for the purchase and deployment of COVID-19 vaccines. IFC is also investing heavily in vaccine manufacturers through its $4 billion global health platform. In education, we are helping countries reopen primary and secondary schools safely and quickly. We are working in 65 countries to implement remote learning strategies combining online resources with radio, TV, and social networks and printed materials for the most vulnerable. We are also partnering with UNICEF and UNESCO on school reopening frameworks. Third, we need to help the poorest countries permanently reduce their debt burdens and attract effective investment, which will require much greater debt and investment transparency. A combination of factors has led to excessive debt in countries where there is no margin for error. At the spring meetings this year, I proposed, along with IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, that G20 official bilateral creditors suspend collection of debt service payments from the poorest countries. The G20 and Paris Club endorsed this approach, which took effect on May 1. As of early October, 44 countries were benefiting from an estimated $5 billion in debt service relief. But much more needs to be done. We have called on the G20 to extend the debt relief through the end of 2021. Importantly, each G20 government should urge DSSI participation by all the private creditors under their jurisdiction and by all their bilateral public sector creditors. Private creditors and non-participating bilateral creditors should not be allowed to free ride on the debt relief of others, certainly not at the expense of the world's poor. We need to work together to achieve full transparency of the terms of existing and new government debt and debt-like commitments. For the poorest countries, creditors and debtors alike should embrace this transparency in order to work quickly toward long-term debt sustainability. That's in everyone's interest. We also need new tools to reduce the debt stock of the poorest countries. The World Bank and IMF are proposing to the Development Committee a joint action plan for debt reduction for IDA countries facing unsustainable debt situations. Fourth, we need to work together to facilitate the changes needed for an inclusive and resilient recovery. A key step to generate a sustainable recovery will be for economies and people to allow change and embrace it. Countries will need to allow capital, labor, skills, and innovation to shift to a different post-COVID business environment. This puts a premium on workers and businesses using their skills and innovations in new ways, and in a commercial environment that is likely to rely more on electronic connections and less on travel and handshakes. More broadly, COVID-19 has demonstrated with deadly effect that national borders offer little protection against some calamities. It is critical that countries work toward their climate and environmental goals. Amid the pandemic, the World Bank Group has remained the largest multilateral financier of climate action. Over the last 5 years, we provided $83 billion in climate-related investments. I'm happy to say that in fiscal year 2020, my first full year as president of the World Bank Group made more climate-related investments than at any time in its history. We intend to step up that work over the next 5 years. The scale of the challenges ahead is staggering. To put the financial challenge in perspective, consider the 100 million people we fear have already been pushed into extreme poverty by COVID. To provide just them $2 per day would cost $70 billion per year. That's just to undo one part of COVID's damage and well beyond the financial capacity of the World Bank Group or any other development agency. It makes clear that IDA 19's 3-year envelope of $82 billion will not be nearly enough to meet the needs of the world's poorest countries at this desperate time. Of necessity, and with the strong support of its shareholders, IDA has taken broad and fast action to front-load IDA-19 resources and provide surge financing this year to support the initial efforts to address the economic and health impacts of COVID. A $25 billion supplemental COVID emergency financing package would avert a financing cliff in FY 22 and 23 and make available additional resources to IDA countries to support their recoveries. Within the World Bank Group, I'm working to build the world's strongest development staff and an even more responsive business model that can help each client country and region achieve better development outcomes. I appointed 4 new senior leaders in FY 20, and we made 12 vice presidential appointments or reassignments. We realigned the World Bank's staff and management to drive coordinated country programs and put high quality knowledge at the center of our operations and development policy. We also strengthened our focus on Africa by creating 2 vice presidencies, one focused on Western and Central Africa and the other on Eastern and Southern Africa. Making use of the capital increase, IFC is maintaining and building its 3.0 strategy to help countries create markets and is working with MIGA and the rest of the World Bank Group in promoting increased investments and quality infrastructure for broad-based economic recoveries and long-term development. We are determined to ensure strong accountability processes and are making rapid progress to implement the new inspection panel toolkit for the World Bank and to complete the review and reform of the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman for IFC and MIGA. Even in the midst of a once-in-a-century crisis, I am encouraged by countries that are already taking bold action, learning fast, and sharing their experiences and results for the benefit of others. I am confident that sustainable solutions will emerge, in part by embracing constructive change through innovation, new uses for existing assets, workers using their skills in new ways, and a reset on excessive debt burdens. Strong governance systems can help by creating a stable rule of law while allowing and facilitating innovation and change. Working together, I believe that we can shorten the downturn and build a strong foundation for a more durable model of prosperity, one that can lift all countries and all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Georgieva and Mr. Malpass. I would like to thank the governors of the IMF and the World Bank Group for the honor to have served as chair of the governors this year, and I thank you for your support and cooperation. Allow me also to express my deep appreciation to Ms. Georgieva and Mr. Malpass for their leadership and to the staffs of the Fund and the World Bank Group for carrying out the vital work of our institutions. I would like to thank the secretaries of the Fund and the Bank, Mr. Ogada and Ms. Gaye, as well as the staff of the Secretariat of both institutions for organizing these meetings. I would also like to thank the 2 vice chairs, the governors for Brazil and Kuwait. I wish to congratulate the governor for Mexico, who has been selected to chair for the coming year.